Welcome everybody to the Interdisciplinary Studies 510, Week 6 presentation. Week 6 is all about action research and participatory action research, or as we like to call it, PAR. And this presentation is brought to you by Team 5. Team 5 are the paragliders, or the paragliders, consisting of Ellen, Peter, and Arv. So let's go over this week's agenda. The objectives of action research and participatory action research, known as PAR. We'll give you some examples of PAR. We'll talk about the article review. We'll talk about the origins of PAR. We'll talk about principles and goals of PAR. We'll talk about what makes PAR unique and participant roles in PAR. We'll give you some issues that we found with the name PAR. We'll talk about the ethics and the power relations as they relate to action research and PAR. We'll talk about self-care while using PAR. Talk about validity and quality of PAR. We'll run you through an exercise that we came up with on PAR and the Xerox company. We'll talk about a little bit about the Moodle Post for week 6, talk a little bit about the supplementary readings, and of course the reference list. So let's take a little look at the objectives of action research and participatory action research. And really, what are the differences when we look at action research versus PAR? Well, for action research, theorists consider the most important aspects of this and as part of their approach, and namely taking that through the collaborative research process and using it to the results to promote social change. And so I want to underline the fact that it's the theorists who are considering the most important aspect of this approach in order to promote social change versus PAR research, which is really where the ordinary community members generate this new knowledge about issues and problems they care about, and in order to get to the end result, which is to promote personal and social change. So underline that aspect, that it is about the ordinary community members generating new knowledge. So as Arv likes to put it, he gave us this book about having skin in the game, and really that's what really PAR is. It's about the ordinary community members having skin in the game in order to promote social change. The example we have of participatory action research is from this week's reading, where we talk about the building on the disability rights movement slogan, "Nothing about us without us." And here's where researchers strove to carry out research that would promote the rights of disabled people, challenge the oppression they faced, and in order to change their lives by changing the attitudes, services, the policies, and the legislations that dealt with their disability rights. So let's talk a little bit about this week's article and what it's all about. So in this week's article, it talks about action research and participatory action research. Gives a little bit about the history about what the two are and how they are different, and a little bit about the movement of participatory action research and how it has evolved and who the founders are. It also talks a bit about the framework for enabling people to diagnose with mental health problems, to carry out the research, and in doing so to promote health equity, citizenship, and social justice for people with that diagnosis. The participatory research approach is really aimed at including ordinary community members in generating that practical knowledge when it comes to looking at their issues and their problems and trying to work their way through that in promoting personal and social change. The article also talks about Hearing Our Voices project, and in particular the the participatory research projects carried out in Calgary, Alberta, by a group of people diagnosed with schizophrenia, and their approach that they used in looking at the mental health process, research through that. The next two slides talk about the origins of participatory action research and where the origins came from. So the first one deals with the northern origin. And so here, theorist Kurt Lewin is credited with coming up with the term action research. Lewin put forth a problem-solving methodology which was circular in nature and which consisted of a collaborative planning and action step, then followed by an observation and data gathering step, followed by an evaluation and reconceptualization of the data, and then further experimentation, and then back up to the collaborative planning and action step. So the idea was to continue to have a circular fashion, seek out consistent improvement and refinement as you conducted this research. The second major origin of PAR is known as the Southern origin. The Southern origin really comes from the Marxist tradition, and the founders of this are Paulo Freire, Fals Borda, and Mohammed Raiman. This version was part of that Marxist tradition, and as well are all aware from the Marxist standpoint, this approach sought to empower the oppressed people. Our next slide talks about the principles and the goals of participatory action research. These can be found on page 153 of the article. So under the principles of PAR, there are 5 steps here. The first one is there's a commitment to the participation of ordinary people as co-researchers, part of this process. The second is that there's respect for the knowledge of all the participants that are in this process. Thirdly, there's mutual learning among the participants. Fourthly, there's attention to the needs of the marginalized and the disempowered groups and people that are part of this process. Lastly, there's action to promote social justice for those marginalized people and others like them as part of this process. In terms of the goals of PAR, the first is to produce practical knowledge. The second goal is to take action and make the knowledge available to everyone. Thirdly, it is to be transformative both socially and for the individuals who take part of the process. An important note here is that Schneider made a very, very valuable point in the article when she mentions that each PAR project must find its own way to achieve the goal of finding solutions and promoting social justice for the people involved in that particular project. And I think by following the principles and the goals as outlined, each project is able to achieve that. The next slide talks about what makes PAR unique. So here we have 3 things that make participatory action research unique. First is PAR is a philosophy of engagement in research process rather than research method. Secondly, participatory action research does not direct researchers to particular research sites or gathering data strategies. Thirdly, PAR researchers work in all settings and use both quantitative and qualitative approaches to their research. The next 2 slides, we're going to talk about the participant roles in PAR. There are really 4 roles. So the first slide deals with the first 2. So let's get into that. The consultation role and the contribution role. So in the consultation role, participants may be asked to be involved in certain aspects of the design of the project or the study, such as interviews or surveys, but really the control of all aspects of the research is retained by the researchers themselves. Under the contribution role, participants are involved with significant aspects of the project and often are employed by the researcher to look at different aspects of the research, but all the final decisions on the project are made by the researcher. So here on the next slide, we get into the next participant roles in PAR, the third and the fourth one. The third one being the collaboration role. And this is where the participants collaborate with the professional researchers in all aspects of the project, from selecting the topic to the research questions, the study design, gathering and analyzing the data, and disseminating the findings. The fourth is the controlled role. And this is where the participants initiate, direct, and lead the study. And it's the researchers who may be involved, but only at the request of the participants. So as you can see from the four examples here, there really is a spectrum from one end to the other. On this slide, we'd like to talk a little bit about some of the issues with the name PAR, and in particular the fact that there are a number of threads from different theorists or scholars that have developed over time, which seem to really go on a spectrum that ends up from one end to the other. So the first one, really from Reason and Bradbury, they identified this thread called cooperative inquiry based on some of the work that they were doing from experimental learning communities based on humanistic education. The second group was Minkler and Wallerstein, that indicated that through their work, through community-based participatory research, they did similar work to cooperative inquiry, as both had similar meaning and the solutions to practical problems were the same. Wallerstein and Duren as well further suggested that all the terms can be seen on this continuum and claimed that the terms AR and PAR have begun to be used interchangeably, signaling this convergence of values and principle or practices. Now, certainly I'd like to caution the fact that that although Wallerstein and Duren have stated this, one could be met with debate from other theorists and researchers regarding this, and saying that no, it's not the same. It's not on a continuum. It is quite different, and each has their own nuances working through this community or group methodology. So the next slide, we want to talk about the ethics and the power relationships when it comes to action research and participatory action research. So the two main ones here, ethics and what those are. So really, when we look at ethical issues, those include things like the anonymity, confidentiality, the informed consent, and the management of power relations within the research group. We will leave ethics as a topic for week 9 and those articles there. But what we want to say here is that one of the most important aspects to consider in any research projects, particularly the ones dealing with qualitative research, is the aspect of ethics. The next one is when it comes to dealing with AR and PAR, it's really about challenging the unsettling, entrenched, and sometimes invisible power arrangements and mechanisms that are enacted in everyday relationships, as Frisby points out in his article in 2009. with this comes the issue of power. So power will be constantly shifting, resource requiring attention, not just at the beginning of the project, but throughout, and as relationships develop, change, and morph as you're doing your research, particularly when it comes to qualitative research. On this next slide, we'd like to talk a little bit about self-care while conducting participatory action research. There's 3 points we'd like to bring up here. The first is that self-care as a researcher, it's extremely important as a component to look at that and plan it out the same way you'd be planning out different other facets of your study. The second point is that self-care should include strategies that are tailored to meet the needs of the individual researcher as well as the people that the researcher is researching. The third point comes from Rager and the work that she did in her self-care and the qualitative researcher when collecting data can break your heart article, that self-care during research should not be left to chance, as she puts it. A researcher must be mindful that by confronting the joys and horrors of others, the experience, we face the joys and horrors of our experience. Because of this, we must ask ourselves before embarking on that, really be mindful of that, be objective about that, make sure that you're prepared for what you may hear as part of that interaction of the research. On this slide, we want to talk about validity and quality of participatory action research. So one of the initial criticisms that has come out of participatory action research is the validity of some of the roles. So in particular, the roles under the collaborative and controlling roles. The criticism is that when you have ordinary people leading this research, do they have the knowledge to actually carry out this research? And how valid is it? So in order to try and address that type of concern, Bradbury and Reason in 2001 designed a series of 6 questions to guide the assessment of participatory action research projects in quality and validity. And those can be found on page 161 of the article. And those are, is there relational participation? Is there practical useful? Is it practically useful? Is it conceptually, theoretically, and methodologically coherent? Does it extend our ways of knowing? Is it significant? Does it lead to new or changed social practices? So by incorporating those 6 particular questions in the research, this really provides that guidepost for validity and quality of the research. So this week, Team 5 wanted to try a little bit different exercise here. And so what we've done is, in the next 3 slides, we'll unroll and package our participatory action research exercise from the Xerox company. This is based on an actual case study, but we thought we'd provide you with our version of it. So here, John, he's a union employee, and he was called up to the office, and he knew by having been called up to the office and the executive team that this couldn't be good news. Management told him that the company had to lower its costs in order to be competitive and stay competitive in the marketplace. They were bringing in a consultant to seek possible solutions on how to do that. Did this mean John or any of his colleagues would lose their jobs? Well, he knew it might. He knew, and he also knew how much this job meant to him and to others. So that night, John went home to tell his wife about the proposed or potential job cuts, and how the company was intending to downsize and to try and cut costs, and how they were going to try and figure all this out by going out and hiring a consultant. He was about to put his and his wife, his and his colleagues' livelihoods in the hands of management and consultants, and boy, that sure didn't seem like a great idea. So John's wife, who happened to be learning about participatory action research in her interdisciplinary 510 course, told her husband that he should ask to be part of a cost savings team to develop a participatory action research solutions. And so then this way, everyone would have a voice. So as part of the Moodle Post for week 6, we'd like you to become part of the the solution for the Xerox company. And our first question that we'd like you to answer is, if you were John, what would you propose to the Xerox management team about the benefits of participatory action research? The second question we'd like you to do is, how would you apply the principles of PAR to your own research question? So we'd like your responses on the post to be a maximum of 300 words, no more. And so let's get part of the discussion going. As part of this week's presentation, we also have some supplementary readings for you, as well as a video. So here are 3 readings that you can look to provide you with some additional background and information. And for those of you that learn better by watching, we have a action research video, a short one that you can take advantage of as well. So here on the last 3 slides, we have the reference section. Reference section's made up of the first slide here containing the article references, and the last 2 slides including the image references used for the PowerPoint presentation. This concludes our presentation, and we look forward to reading your responses to the questions that we've provided to you this week, and we'll be responding to those during the week.